Thank you so much for your compelling remarks, for your championship, for your courage. Thank you for giving us that courage also to continue to fight. As you say, it's political will. It is bringing action to bear. But thank you so much for taking the time to share with us your perspectives and your personal reflections. Means a lot to us. I hope that you can continue to join us for as much as your schedule permits. We understand that you have many demands on your time.
I have to catch a 2:30 flight to Boston, but I can stick around.
Please do the next. Please do. The next panelist is going to be talking about conflict, which is something you mentioned. But please join us back at the stage.
Elma City, I don't want to disrupt things when.
Thank you so much. Our third panelist is Rob Voss. Rob is currently director of the Markets, Trade and Institutions Division at IFPRI. And it's exactly his 1 month anniversary at IFPRI. And he joined us from FAO, where he was one of the lead coordinators of the team that put together this report. So Rob, it is very fitting to have you with us, wearing your IFPRI hat, wearing your former IFPRI, FAO hat, and so forth. Conflict is something that you have, is one of the key sort of features of this report. And I would like to ask you, what does this imply for the fight against global hunger? You know, how do we handle this nexus between conflict and hunger, and how does it have implications for how we fight? Thank you.
Thank you, and of course I'm very happy to be here. Can't say anything different than what's in the report, having been so involved in the report, but let me, in answering in the most shortest term, your question is what needs to change. The first thing is to recognize the complexity of the issues. So one of the stark findings of this report is that nowadays more than half of the hungry people live in countries affected by conflict, and in most cases compounded by natural disasters, and particularly climate-related events. Complexity also comes from, as the report also emphasizes, that there's a two-way causal relationship between these things. It's not just that conflict impacts on livelihoods and destroys crops and impedes distribution networks from functioning, but also conversely, it's the food insecure situation, dispossession of assets, particularly in rural areas, that we see now as major causes of conflict. And we've seen that, as the report makes clear, for the past 5 to 10 years, 150% rise in the frequency of the number of conflicts. And most of these are intrastate, so within borders conflicts. Most of them are fought in rural areas and directly affecting rural livelihoods. So what it means that we need to recognize that, and it has been recognized. If you take the SDGs, that linkage has been recognized. The question is how you address that. And that's where the complexities come in. For instance, we take what happened earlier this year in South Sudan, which where for the first time in many, many years, decades, a famine was declared, right? A real famine. Now, with quick, immediate international action, the famine situation has been attenuated. So we no longer speak of a famine. But it didn't help. The problem was not so much that people didn't, there was no food to get, but because of the conflict, people couldn't get to that food. But because of the food aid, the situation improved, but not sufficient to improve people's livelihoods. What people have been doing in the affected regions of South Sudan still move away, many of them, to the southern part of the border regions with Uganda, and that's where now we will start seeing increased risk of food security. So what it shows is that one can help things in these situations with food aid, but it won't be enough. And the trick is to work towards building better resilience of livelihoods and moving from what you can do in the short run that will help build the resilience to longer term measures, which not just look at the food security issue, but can also make households more resilient towards the effects of climate change, and doing so will make it go hand in hand. So the strong message here is we have to recognize, but in the action, we have to recognize the complexity, but in the action we have to take them together. So the fight against hunger should go hand in hand with preventing conflict from happening and fighting climate change.
Rob, thank you very much. Let me push you for one more moment on the resilience building, because you mentioned that, and fighting conflict. Can we actually build resilience even as conflict is underway? And should we wait until the conflict is over? Can we afford to wait? What happens to food and nutrition security in that context?
Yeah, well, it's also in doing the research for this report, we found that's where sometimes the difficulties come in. But the upshot of the key findings is in most situations there's a long way you can go to continue supporting, and you must do that, households, but particularly protecting their livelihoods. So in many cases social protection programs have helped people survive situations of or the shocks emanating from both conflict or natural disasters. But also to providing inputs, keeping the cows healthy, particularly in South Sudan, which livestock is one of the main assets. But it also brings risks. Again, the example of South Sudan is that if the healthy cattle can also become the prey of the rebels and fuel further the conflict. So you have to do it in ways that it linked to also fighting the conflict. And let me conclude is that so it's complex, but it can be done, but you have to look specifically context by context, and it's important to keep things moving both during the conflict and also to build resilience to prevent further conflicts from emerging. And I would like to link that to some of the points, one of the points which Homi raised, and sort of also looking at the international support. I think that's where also we need to change things around. Not just that international support for food and agriculture is waning among many donors. Also 85% of the support is for humanitarian action, emergency relief. And from what I just said, we need to bridge that between emergency relief is always needed, but if we don't combine that with rebuilding and making livelihoods more resilient and sustainable, then we will undermine our own efforts at getting to both peace, food security, and putting an end to the impacts of climate change.